In the mountain passes north of Islamabad, intelligence officers rotate shifts in facilities that do not appear on maps. In the urban neighborhoods of Karachi, informants relay fragments of conversation that will be analyzed, cross-referenced, and fed into assessments that shape decisions made in rooms the public will never see. In foreign capitals, operatives cultivate relationships that may not yield results for years, if at all. This is not the work of a single agency. This is the architecture of survival in a state where intelligence is not an auxiliary function, but a central pillar of national continuity. The Inter-Services Intelligence, known simply as ISI, operates not as a traditional intelligence service, but as a network system designed to address threats that have never stopped emerging since the country's founding. To understand ISI is to understand why Pakistan has never had the luxury of treating intelligence as peripheral. Most accounts of ISI begin with folklore, the shadowy hand behind regional events, the unseen force manipulating outcomes, the agency that operates beyond accountability. These narratives, whether hostile or admiring, share a common flaw. They treat ISI as though it were a rogue element, disconnected from the state it serves. This is a fundamental misreading. ISI is not separate from Pakistan's strategic reality. It is a direct expression of it. The organization exists because Pakistan's security environment has demanded, from the moment of partition, a level of intelligence coordination that most stable nations never require. Born in a region where borders were drawn hastily, where territorial disputes remain unresolved, and where existential threats have been constant rather than theoretical, ISI developed not as a choice, but as a necessity. It is an instrument shaped by threat perception, constrained resources, and the imperatives of a state that has faced challenges to its survival more frequently than most care to acknowledge. Intelligence organizations in stable, geographically secure nations operate with the advantage of distance. Threats arrive from afar. There is time to assess, debate, and respond. For Pakistan, this luxury has never existed. Sharing a contested border with a significantly larger neighbor, positioned at the crossroads of South Asia, Central Asia, and the Middle East, and internally fragmented by ethnic, linguistic, and sectarian divides, the Pakistani state learned early that intelligence could not be reactive. It had to be anticipatory. It had to operate across multiple domains simultaneously. It had to coordinate not just within military and civilian structures, but across the entire apparatus of national security. This is why ISI is structured the way it is. Not because of ambition, but because of geography. Not because of ideology, but because of circumstance. When your adversaries are immediate and your strategic depth is minimal, intelligence becomes the primary mechanism for creating space to maneuver. What distinguishes ISI from many of its counterparts is not secrecy alone, though secrecy is integral. It is the degree to which intelligence functions as a coordinating force across institutions. In nations where civilian and military spheres are more clearly delineated, intelligence agencies report upward and operate within defined mandates. In Pakistan, the structure is different. ISI serves as a nexus. It connects military intelligence with civilian oversight, external operations with internal security, strategic planning with tactical response. This is not an accident of bureaucracy. It reflects a conscious design intended to ensure that information flows quickly, that assessments are integrated, and that action can be taken without the paralysis that comes from institutional fragmentation. The organizational model is one of controlled redundancy and deliberate overlap, where compartmentalization protects operations while coordination ensures coherence. It is a system built to function under pressure, where delays are not tolerated and where the cost of failure is measured in national security terms. Silence is not a byproduct of ISI's operations. It is a tool. Deniability is not evasion. It is strategy. In intelligence work, what is not said often matters more than what is confirmed. Ambiguity creates room for maneuver. It complicates adversary calculations. It allows for actions that achieve objectives without triggering responses that would otherwise be inevitable. This is not unique to Pakistan, but Pakistan has refined it. The organization has learned that in a region where narratives shape perceptions as much as facts, controlling information is as valuable as collecting it. The absence of public statements is not a failure of transparency. It is a deliberate choice to operate in a space where accountability is internal, where effectiveness is measured by outcomes rather than appearances, and where the broader public is deliberately kept at a distance from operational realities. Critics often frame this as authoritarianism. Defenders frame it as pragmatism. Both miss the point. The question is not whether ISI should operate with more openness or less. The question is whether any intelligence service in Pakistan's position could function differently and still succeed. When your adversaries do not announce their intentions, when your threats are asymmetric and continuously evolving, and when your margin for error is narrow, the organization adapts. It becomes less about oversight in the conventional sense and more about results. It becomes less about public confidence and more about institutional trust within the security apparatus. This is not an endorsement. It is an observation. Intelligence services in high-pressure environments do not mirror those in low-pressure ones, because the conditions that shape them are fundamentally different. To understand ISI is to first understand that intelligence in Pakistan is not simply about gathering information. It is about shaping the environment in which the state operates. It is about creating strategic options where none naturally exist. It is about ensuring that decisions made today account for threats that may not materialize for years. This requires long-term thinking, patience, and a willingness to operate in gray zones where clear victories are rare and where success is often measured by what did not happen rather than what did. ISI operates in the space because that is where Pakistan's security challenges exist. To evaluate the organization without understanding this context is to misunderstand why it exists at all. Intelligence networks are not monolithic. They are ecosystems. Within ISI, information does not flow in straight lines from collection to decision. It moves through filters, passes through analysts who specialize in different domains, and is reassessed at multiple levels before it reaches those who act on it. This is intentional. A single intelligence officer in Quetta monitoring cross-border movement does not see the same picture as an analyst in Islamabad tracking financial networks, and neither has the full context known to planners coordinating responses across regions. This is not inefficiency. It is design. Compartmentalization ensures that compromise at one level does not unravel the entire structure. It ensures that operations remain insulated from exposure. It ensures that those who need to know have access, and those who do not remain unaware. In intelligence work, knowledge is not democratized. It is distributed according to necessity, and necessity is determined by role, clearance, and operational relevance. The layered architecture of ISI reflects the complexity of the environment it must navigate. Pakistan's intelligence priorities are not uniform. The threats along the Afghan border differ fundamentally from those in urban centers, which differ again from maritime vulnerabilities along the Arabian Sea, or the intelligence contest with India across multiple fronts. Each domain requires specialized focus, distinct operational methods, and separate chains of coordination. Yet these cannot function in isolation. A network monitoring militant activity in the tribal regions must feed assessments to units tracking internal security, which must coordinate with those managing counterintelligence against foreign services. This web of interdependence is managed through structured coordination mechanisms that are rarely visible but constantly active. Liaison officers, joint cells, and interagency committees exist not for show but to ensure that intelligence collected in one theater informs decisions made in another. The system is not elegant, it is functional, and functionality in intelligence work is the only metric that matters. What makes this structure resilient is redundancy. Multiple sources confirm the same intelligence, Multiple analysts assess the same data from different perspectives. Multiple agencies maintain overlapping capabilities in critical areas. To outsiders, this appears wasteful. To those within the system, it is survival. When the cost of a single failure is catastrophic, redundancy is not excess. It is insurance. If one source is compromised, others remain operational. If one assessment proves flawed, competing analyses provide alternatives. If one unit is penetrated, the damage is contained. This layering of capabilities ensures that the network continues to function even under stress, even under attack, even when individual components fail. It also creates internal friction. Agencies compete for resources. Analysts disagree on interpretations. Operational units protect their sources and resist sharing information that might expose methods. This friction is managed, not eliminated. It is understood that some degree of internal tension sharpens judgment, prevents groupthink, and ensures that decisions are not made on consensus alone, but on rigorously tested assessments. The interaction between intelligence and military structures in Pakistan is closer than in most democracies, and this proximity is often misunderstood. Critics see it as militarization of intelligence. Observers within the system see it as operational necessity. When your primary adversaries are state actors with sophisticated intelligence capabilities and non-state actors who operate across porous borders, the distinction between military operations and intelligence operations blurs. ISI is not a civilian agency that occasionally coordinates with the military. It is embedded within the security apparatus. Its leadership is drawn from military ranks. Its operational priorities align with national defense strategies. Its resources are allocated according to threat assessments that are inherently military in nature. This does not mean it operates without civilian oversight, though that oversight functions differently than in Western democracies. It means that the boundary between intelligence gathering and military action is deliberately permeable, allowing for rapid transitions from assessment to response when circumstances demand it. Civilian structures interact with ISI not through direct command, but through coordination at the highest levels of government. Political leadership sets strategic priorities. Intelligence leadership translates those priorities into operational mandates. The relationship is consultative, but it is not equal. In moments of crisis, intelligence assessments carry weight that can override political considerations, not because ISI seeks power, but because the information it possesses often reveals urgencies that political processes are too slow to address. This dynamic creates tension. Elected officials may prioritize diplomatic or economic considerations. Intelligence assessments may indicate that those considerations are being exploited by adversaries. The resolution of these tensions occurs in secure rooms where the public is not present and where the calculus is not about popularity, but about survival. This is uncomfortable for those who believe intelligence should serve political leadership without question. It is reality for those who understand that intelligence, when accurate, reveals constraints that politics cannot ignore. Regional realities dictate where ISI focuses its resources. The eastern border with India commands sustained attention because the relationship is defined by unresolved territorial disputes, a history of conflict, and ongoing intelligence competition that has never paused. The western border with Afghanistan requires a different approach, one oriented toward tribal networks, militant groups, and the shifting dynamics of governance in a region that has never been fully controlled by any central authority. Internal security concerns, particularly in urban centers and areas with ethnic or sectarian tensions, require intelligence that is more granular, more immediate, and more sensitive to local dynamics. Each of these domains demands different skill sets, different operational tempos, and different levels of risk tolerance. ISI does not operate the same way in Karachi as it does in the federally administered tribal areas, and it does not operate in either place the way it does across the line of control. The network adapts to the terrain, both physical and political. Because intelligence that is effective in one context may be useless or counterproductive in another. What is deliberately not shared is often as important as what is communicated. Within ISI, operational security depends on limiting access to information even among those who are cleared to receive it. An analyst producing assessments on regional militant networks does not need to know the identities of human sources providing that information. A field officer running an operation does not need to know how the intelligence that justified that operation was obtained. A decision-maker authorizing an action does not need to know every step that will be taken to execute it. This compartmentalization protects sources, preserves methods, and limits exposure if something goes wrong. It also creates gaps. Not every actor in the system has full visibility. Not every decision is made with complete information. This is accepted because the alternative full transparency within the organization would make the entire network vulnerable to penetration, compromise, and collapse. Coordination is not about moving fast. It is about moving correctly. Intelligence organizations under pressure often face demands to act immediately, to respond to threats before they materialize, to prevent attacks before they are fully understood. Speed, in these circumstances, is a liability. Premature action based on incomplete intelligence can escalate conflicts, expose methods, and create consequences worse than inaction. ISI's operational culture emphasizes restraint, verification, and timing. An intelligence assessment that arrives too early may be dismissed. One that arrives too late is useless. The skill lies in knowing when information is sufficient to act and when more collection is required. This judgment is not formulaic. It depends on experience, intuition, and an understanding of how adversaries think and react. It requires patience in an environment where patience is often in short supply. The structure of ISI, its layers of coordination, its compartmentalization, its internal redundancies, all of this creates a system that can withstand significant stress. But structure alone does not ensure effectiveness. What makes intelligence networks succeed or fail is not the design on paper, but the psychology of those within it, the pressure they operate under, and the choices they make when certainty is absent and consequences are high. Understanding this requires looking beyond organization charts and into the decision-making environments where intelligence is not data, but dilemma. Decision-making in intelligence is not about choosing the right answer. It is about choosing among answers that are all incomplete, all uncertain, and all carry consequences that will not be fully understood until years later. In the operations rooms where ISI assessments are weighed, officers confront a recurring reality. The information they have is never enough, the time they have is always shorter than needed, and the stakes are always higher than anyone outside those rooms can appreciate. This is the environment in which intelligence decisions are made. Not in clarity, but in fog. Not with confidence, but with calculated risk. The question is never whether the intelligence is perfect. The question is whether it is sufficient to act, and whether acting creates more danger than waiting. Pressure in intelligence work is not episodic. It is constant. Officers monitoring developments along the Afghan border are not dealing with a single crisis that will resolve and provide relief. They are managing a continuous stream of fragmentary information, conflicting reports, and evolving threats that do not pause for analysis. Those tracking adversary intelligence services operate with the knowledge that their counterparts are doing the same to them, that every move is being observed, and that even routine actions can reveal patterns that compromise future operations. Those producing assessments for decision-makers carry the burden of knowing that their judgments will shape actions that affect national security, regional stability, and human lives. This pressure does not diminish with experience. It compounds. The longer an officer works in intelligence, the more acutely they understand how much can go wrong, how easily assumptions can mislead, and how often the most dangerous threats are the ones that were not anticipated. The psychological weight of operating under these conditions is rarely discussed, but it defines how intelligence systems function. Officers do not make decisions with detachment. They make them knowing that error is not just possible but likely, and that the consequences of error are not abstract. A misjudgment about militant activity can result in failed operations, civilian casualties, or escalations that spiral into broader conflict. A miscalculation about adversary intentions can leave the state vulnerable to surprise. A premature conclusion based on incomplete intelligence can prompt actions that reveal sources, compromise methods, and undermine long-term strategic positioning. The margin for error is narrow, and the pressure to avoid error creates a culture where caution is not weakness but discipline. Intelligence officers are trained to question their own assessments, to challenge assumptions, and to recognize that certainty is a cognitive trap that leads to disaster. Uncertainty is not a problem to be solved. It is a condition to be managed. In most professions, decisions are made when sufficient information is available. In intelligence, decisions are made when time runs out, not when clarity arrives. This creates a paradox. Waiting for more information reduces the risk of acting on flawed intelligence, but it also increases the risk that the opportunity to act will pass, or that the threat will materialize before action is taken. The judgment of when to move from collection to decision is not formulaic. It depends on the nature of the threat, the reliability of the sources, the potential consequences of action versus inaction, and the broader strategic context in which the decision sits. Officers who excel in this environment are not those who seek certainty. They are those who develop an instinct for when uncertainty has been reduced enough to justify risk. Patience and intelligence work as a discipline, not a preference. The pressure to act quickly is immense, particularly when political leaders demand responses, when public anxiety rises, or when adversaries appear to be gaining ground. But premature action based on incomplete intelligence is one of the most common sources of strategic failure. ISI's operational culture emphasizes restraint precisely because the cost of moving too soon has been learned through experience. An operation launched before the intelligence picture is clear can alert adversaries, disrupt ongoing collection, and foreclose options that would have been more effective with time. A public statement made before facts are verified can lock decision-makers into positions that limit flexibility. A response to a perceived threat that was misunderstood can escalate tensions that were manageable. Restraint, in these contexts, is not passivity. It is the recognition that intelligence power depends as much on what is not done as on what is. The greatest risk in intelligence is not failure to detect a threat. It is misjudgment of what a threat means. Information can be accurate and still lead to flawed conclusions. A militant group's movements can be tracked precisely, but their intent misread. A foreign intelligence service's activities can be documented thoroughly, but their objective misunderstood. An internal security concern can be identified early, but its significance either overestimated or dismissed. Misjudgment occurs not because intelligence officers are careless, but because the environment they analyze is designed to deceive, because adversaries actively obscure their intentions, and because context changes faster than assessments can be updated. The discipline required to minimize misjudgment is constant recalibration. Assessments are revisited, assumptions are tested, alternative explanations are considered. This process is exhausting, and it is never complete. But it is the only defense against the certainty that leads to catastrophic error. Internal stress within intelligence organizations is often invisible, but it shapes outcomes as much as any operational decision. Officers work under classification restrictions that prevent them from discussing their assessments openly, even with colleagues who hold different clearances. They operate in environments where failure is scrutinized intensely. But success is rarely acknowledged because successful intelligence often prevents events that never occur. They manage the knowledge that their decisions, if wrong, will be dissected in hindsight with information they did not have at the time. This creates a culture where silence is valued, where ambiguity is tolerated, and where the psychological burden of responsibility is carried individually rather than shared. The toll this takes is not measured in operational metrics. It is measured in the attrition of judgment, the gradual erosion of confidence, and the recognition that no decision, no matter how carefully made, is immune to the chaos of real-world consequences. Intelligent success is defined not by visible action, but by stability that is never disrupted. The attacks that do not happen, the crises that are diffused before they escalate, the adversary operations that are quietly neutralized without public acknowledgement. ISI's effectiveness, like that of any intelligence service, is measured in outcomes that remain invisible. This creates a paradox for those outside the system. When nothing happens, it appears that nothing was needed. When something happens, it appears that intelligence failed. The reality is that intelligence work operates in the space between these perceptions, where success is the maintenance of a status quo that is always under threat, and where failure is often the result of constraints that were beyond the control of those making decisions. The limitation of intelligence power is not capability, it is consequence. ISI has the capacity to collect information across multiple domains, to coordinate responses across agencies, and to act with speed when necessary. But every action carries consequences that extend beyond the immediate objective. An operation that achieves a tactical goal may create strategic vulnerabilities. An intelligent success that is publicized may compromise sources that took years to develop. A decision to act in one theater may divert resources from another where threats are equally urgent. Intelligence officers operate with the understanding that power is not defined by what can be done, but by what should be done given the full range of consequences that will follow. This is the discipline that separates effective intelligence organizations from reckless ones. It is also the discipline that ensures intelligence remains a tool of strategy rather than an end in itself. The question that defines intelligence decision-making is not whether action is possible. It is whether action is wise. And wisdom, in this context, is the capacity to weigh incomplete information, tolerate uncertainty, accept risk, and live with the consequences of choices that will never be fully understood. This is the psychological reality of intelligence work, and it is the foundation on which ISI's influence is built, not through dramatic operations, but through the cumulative effective decisions made in silence, under pressure, and with the knowledge that the most important outcomes are the ones that never become visible. Influence in intelligence is not measured by headlines. It is measured by the absence of them. ISI does not operate to generate visibility. It operates to generate outcomes, and outcomes that matter most in intelligence work are the ones that reshape conditions without announcing themselves. A diplomatic crisis that de-escalates quietly, a militant network that fragments before it can strike, a foreign intelligence operation that is neutralized without confrontation. These are not stories. They are results, and results in intelligence are rarely tied to the actions that produce them. The public sees the surface. Intelligence agencies operate beneath it, shaping trajectories that will only become apparent years later, if at all. This is not secrecy for its own sake. It is the recognition that power announced is power constrained, and that influence preserved is influence that can be used again. The difference between power that is seen and power that is felt is the difference between force and strategy. Visible power requires demonstration. It must be projected, defended, and maintained through continued displays of capability. Intelligence power operates differently. It does not need to be seen to be effective. It does not need to be acknowledged to shape behavior. Adversaries adjust their actions not because they know what ISI has done, but because they know it is watching. Allies coordinate not because they trust ISI's intentions, but because they respect its reach. Decision makers in Islamabad incorporate intelligence assessments not because they are compelled to, but because those assessments have proven accurate enough, often enough, that ignoring them carries risk. This is influence without spectacle. It is the kind of power that endures because it does not exhaust itself through visibility. Intelligence agencies shape outcomes by creating conditions in which certain actions become more likely and others less so. This is not control. It is calibration. ISI does not dictate what happens in the tribal regions, but it can influence which actors gain resources, which networks face pressure, and which power structures are strengthened or undermined. It does not determine the outcome of regional conflicts, but it can shape the information available to decision makers, the options presented, and the timing of critical choices. This influence is exercised through patience, through the accumulation of small advantages over time, and through the disciplined refusal to overreach. Restraint, in this context, is not weakness. It is the understanding that intelligence power is finite, that every action depletes resources and generates risk, and that the most effective organizations are those that know when not to act. Restraint as a strategic weapon is counterintuitive. The instinct in high-pressure environments is to respond immediately, to demonstrate capability, to prove effectiveness through visible results. Intelligence organizations that operate this way exhaust themselves. They burn sources, expose methods, and create adversaries who adapt faster than they can respond. ISI's operational culture, shaped by decades of sustained pressure, has learned that restraint preserves options. An operation delayed is an operation that can be refined. Intelligence withheld is intelligence that retains value. A response deferred is a response that can be executed when conditions are more favorable. This discipline is difficult to maintain when political leaders demand action, when public anxiety demands reassurance, and when adversaries exploit the appearance of inaction. But it is the discipline that allows intelligence organizations to survive over the long term, to remain effective across changing circumstances, and to avoid the strategic exhaustion that comes from constant reaction. The judgment of intelligence work occurs in retrospect and often decades later. Decisions made under uncertainty are evaluated with the clarity of hindsight, which is both unfair and inevitable. An intelligence assessment that prevented a conflict will never be weighed against the conflict that did not happen. An operation that preserved regional stability will not be compared to the instability it avoided. Intelligence officers operate with the knowledge that their successes will be invisible and their failures will be scrutinized. This asymmetry shapes behavior. It creates caution. It reinforces the tendency towards silence. It ensures that those within intelligence systems understand that recognition is not the reward, and that the reward, such as it is, lies in the continuation of a national security environment that allows the state to function. This is not satisfying work for those who seek validation. It is the work of those who accept that their contribution will be felt but never fully acknowledged. The paradox of effective intelligence operations is that they leave no clear narrative. When something dramatic occurs, it becomes a story. When nothing occurs, there is no story to tell. ISI's most significant successes are those that prevented outcomes which, had they occurred, would have become defining moments in Pakistan's history. But because they did not occur, they remain unknown. The crisis that was diffused before it escalated, the attack that was disrupted before it was launched, the adversary operation that was neutralized before it gained traction. These non-events do not generate documentation that historians can analyze. They do not produce testimony that journalists can report. They exist only in the memory of those who were involved, and even among those individuals. The full picture is often fragmented by compartmentalization. This invisibility is intentional. Intelligence effectiveness depends on it, but it also means that the organizations responsible for it operate in a space where understanding is rare and misunderstanding is common. There is a cost to influence that cannot be publicly acknowledged. Intelligence work requires choices that do not fit neatly into ethical frameworks, designed for transparency and accountability. Sources are cultivated who are themselves morally compromised. Relationships are maintained with actors whose objectives do not align with stated national values. Operations are conducted that, if exposed, would be indefensible in public discourse. This is the moral gray zone in which intelligence agencies operate, and it is not a zone they enter casually. It is a zone they enter because the threats they confront do not respect the boundaries that peacetime ethics assume. The officers who navigate the space carry the weight of those decisions individually. They do not seek absolution. They seek effectiveness. And effectiveness in intelligence often means accepting that some actions necessary for national security will never be defensible. In the court of public opinion, public misunderstanding is often the price of long-term stability. ISI operates in an environment where its actions are interpreted through frameworks that do not account for the complexity of the threats it faces. Critics who demand transparency do not account for the reality that transparency in intelligence work compromises effectiveness. Observers who attribute malice to decisions made under uncertainty do not understand the constraints within which those decisions were made. This misunderstanding is not entirely ISI's fault, nor is it entirely the fault of those observing. It is the inevitable consequence of a system designed to operate in silence confronting a public that expects explanations. Intelligence organizations that seek to correct this misunderstanding by explaining themselves compromise the very capabilities that make them effective, and so they accept the misunderstanding, knowing that their legitimacy within the state does not depend on public approval, but on the confidence of those who understand what they prevent. Intelligence power fades the moment it seeks recognition. The need to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be validated by public opinion is antithetical to the function of intelligence. Organizations that prioritize perception over effectiveness lose the capacity to operate in the spaces where intelligence matters most. ISI's influence persists not because it has cultivated a public image, but because it has consistently delivered results that matter to those who make national security decisions. This is not a romanticization of secrecy. It is an acknowledgement that certain forms of power require invisibility to function, and that the moment they become visible, they begin to lose the advantages that made them powerful in the first place. What you do not see shapes what you experience more than what you do. The stability of borders that are not crossed, the attacks that are not carried out, the crises that do not spiral. Intelligence work is the architecture of outcomes that feel inevitable but are in fact the result of decisions made in rooms you will never enter by people whose names you will never know, based on information you will never access. ISI operates in this space because Pakistan's security environment has never allowed it to do otherwise. Understanding this does not require agreement. It requires recognition that intelligence agencies in high-pressure regions are not optional institutions. They are necessary instruments of survival, shaped by the pressures they confront and constrained by the consequences of every choice they make. If you found this examination valuable, there are deeper layers to explore. Intelligence systems do not operate in isolation. They interact with geopolitical forces, historical grievances, and evolving threats that demand sustained analysis. Subscribe for continued exploration of how intelligence power functions in regions where stability is contested and where the margin for error is unforgiving. The next examination will move beyond structure and decision-making into the external dimensions of intelligence competition, where regional adversaries, global powers, and non-state actors contest the same spaces ISI seeks to influence. What you think you understand is only the beginning. What remains unseen is where intelligence work actually occurs.